Hi guys, so it's been a while, but I am actually here to do a currently reading video. If you haven't seen one of these before, it's basically just a way for me to talk about the books that I am currently reading, my thoughts on them so far depending on where I am in the story, because it often changes by the time you reach the end of a book, or the things that are important at the beginning don't always remain important by the end, and it just gives me a way to chat more casually and freely about everything. So I am reading 3 books at the moment, so I thought I would talk to you about them all. The first one is the one that I'm reading in physical copy, and it is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is actually a proof copy from Bloomsbury. It doesn't come out until spring 2018, I think it's April. You'll have to double check that. But I am so pleased to have a copy of this one because it was one of my most anticipated releases of 2018, and I am thoroughly enjoying it at the moment. I am about 105 pages in, and it's just over 300 pages. So I'm about a third of the way through this one, and I haven't actually read Madeline Miller's other book based on Greek myth, which is Song of Achilles. That book was so heavily praised, it won awards. It's just such a popular book, especially if you're even vaguely interested in myth retellings. And yeah, I never actually got around to reading it, so this is my first exposure to Madeline Miller. But I am glad that I'm finally reading it, and if it continues in the vein that it is and I continue to enjoy it throughout, then I'll definitely check out Song of Achilles in the future, because I know people really enjoy that one. I'm sure lots of you will be commenting down below telling me how much you enjoy Song of Achilles. As you have probably gathered, this is a retelling of a Greek myth. It follows the character of Circe, who was the daughter of Helios, one of the Titans, the gods before the Olympians, the generation of Zeus and so on. And Helios is the sun, is ancient Greek for sun. And it's about her life from birth, growing up in Helios's kingdom, to discovering that she is a sorceress and can work magic and use pharmakon, which is again the Greek word for medicine or magic, depends on what context you're using it in. In this context it very much means magic. And yeah, it's about all the people she encounters. It's a retelling of her story, far more bulked out than any ancient piece of literature gives you into her story. So obviously most of it's fictionalized. I mean, it's already a fictional story to begin with. This is Madeline Miller creating fictional versions of an ancient tale within the ancient structure. And I actually haven't even gotten to the point where she meets Odysseus. So one of Circe's most famous appearances in Greek literature is within the Odyssey by Homer, in which she encounters Odysseus on his travels home to Ithaca from the Trojan War. And I haven't even got there yet. I'm a third of the way through, and based on where we are, it's definitely not going to happen in the next couple of pages either, which I thought was really interesting, because I just had this presumption that the majority of the book, at least beginning earlier than it has already, would focus on Circe's time with Odysseus. And obviously I've still got 2/3 yet, so it could be half of the books with Odysseus, but it's been really nice having that much fuller background and childhood and early years of Circe's life, although she's thousands of years old, rather than it just being about that time with Odysseus, because I think that's what we hear about so much when we hear of Circe's mythology. So I've actually really enjoyed going that far back and getting Madeline Miller's version of that. One thing I will say is this is very dark. Some really gruesome things happen. It's, yeah, dark's the best way I could describe it. And that's actually very much in fitting with Greek myth. Greek myth is pretty violent and dark, and horrible things happen, and the gods are pretty horrible. So it feels authentic to its source material in tone, for sure. And yeah, like you can tell, I am enjoying this one. I'm finding it very interesting. It's just making me feel as well like I want to be writing more again as well. It's something I've said recently. I've been writing more, and something I've always wanted to do is write a retelling of a Greek myth, and reading other people doing what I want to do just makes me think I want to do my version of this. Not that I want to do exactly what Madeline Miller's done, but I have my own ideas, and seeing someone else bring their ideas to life in such a magical way makes me want to do that too. So that's good, it's an inspiring read as well. But moving on, I am of course listening to an audiobook. I always have an audiobook on the go, and that is Persuasion by Jane Austen. So this is my third Jane Austen novel. I've read Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park, and now I'm reading Persuasion. I have to say Persuasion is one of the Austens I'm the least familiar with. I have seen one film adaptation of this story before, and it was many years ago, just the once. So I'm not as familiar with the story and the characters, and that's quite nice. I am enjoying this one. There is a reason I think Jane Austen is so popular till today. Her writing is so comforting in a way. It's something I often say about Sherlock Holmes, but I think something like Jane Austen just really takes you out of the world you're currently living in. It takes you to a new place, but at the same time the stories are quite simple and relatable and realistic despite the time they're set in, and you're just following these women's lives and their encounters with love and family, and it's really pleasant, and she has a wonderful writing style. So if you've yet to check out Jane Austen, I would highly recommend doing it. I'm enjoying Persuasion. I have to say my main takeaway to this point is that I find Frederick Wentworth, I believe his name is, very annoying. So the premise of Persuasion is that Anne Elliot rejected the proposal of a young man, Frederick Wentworth, when they were younger, despite being madly in love with him. She was persuaded by people in her family to turn him down. And it's a few years later and she has come back in contact with this man that she rejected, and obviously it's tense and awkward and nobody knows what happened except for the mother figure who told her not to accept his proposal. So she feels really awkward, and he is still quite angry at her for having rejected him, and he's very full of himself. Like, he's not an all-round bad character, but his self-assurance has gotten on my nerves on occasion. But I mean, he's also an interesting, fun character, and I think as the story goes on, I'm going to feel more committed to their story. I'm about 35% of the way through. Of course, it's also frustrating that you know that Anne turned down somebody she loved, but I feel so sympathetic towards her because of how stressful it must have been to a woman in that time period where you basically have a sell-by date in your like mid to late 20s to which you can get married. This pressure, you can't support yourself and picking the right person and everything else, and yeah, I mean they all have their irritating qualities, shall we say, but that's what makes them so nice. They're real, and I'm enjoying listening to this one. Finally, I am reading a non-fiction book on the Kindle app of my phone. This is one that I've been dipping in and out of for a few weeks, just when I don't have a physical book with me or I'm not listening to my audiobook. It's something I can just flick through and read another short chapter of because it's quite a short book with very short chapters. And I'm just past halfway in this one. It's called Hope in the Dark, Untold Histories, Wild Possibilities by Rebecca Solnit. This is actually my first book by Rebecca Solnit, but she's written a few other non-fiction books. And this book in particular is specifically about activism and, as the title suggests, hope. It's kind of how hope can fuel activism, how we can embrace hope to fight for change, and the book's very much about change. And she said a lot of things that I really agree with, so I like her sort of overall thesis of change is very possible. This idea that change is so out of reach and nothing changes is so ludicrous to me. For one, things are constantly changing for the worse. Not that that's a nice thing to contemplate, but I think it demonstrates the fact that culture and society are not stagnant. Things change, they go up and down, and they get better or worse depending on how loudly we shout for either side. My mum always describes this as kind of, there's the two sides, whatever issue you're on, and they're constantly pushing backwards and forwards. One never disappears. You just have to keep pushing, and hope's a really invigorating thing to get you through that, because it's the hope of a achievable future, of making people's lives different in some way, in a positive way. And that's something I already believed, and it was really nice hearing Rebecca Solnit Sona express that, I feel. I really like that, and I think she puts it all very articulately, and I'm really enjoying that about it. And she reflects back on acts of political activism in the past few decades, some that I'm more familiar with than others, which I will say, on the occasions where I'm not that familiar with what she's talking about, I found it a little bit frustrating that there's not a little bit more detail, because she references perhaps like political movements and activism and protests and things that people had to protest against, so things that were going on, and I don't always know what they are, and I think sometimes there's a little bit of an assumption you do know or that you don't need to know, and I would have preferred a little bit more information in these instances, because it's not that long a book, so I feel like it could have been bulked out a little bit more and still not felt like a really heavy academic read. But in saying that, it's so readable, and I don't think the idea that you won't know about everything she's talking about in detail should put you off reading it, because I don't think that takes away from the overarching thesis of the work, and some of it will spark further interest and some of it you'll know about, some of it there is information there, it's just not that much, and I've found it a really invigorating, a really reassuring read. And it's certainly one that even only 50% of the way in, I would certainly recommend checking out. But those are the books I am currently reading. I hope you found this video interesting. I'd love to know if you've read any of these books or any books by these authors and would like to talk about them in the comments, because I'd love to chat about them with you, especially since they're all authors who I'm still interested in reading more of in the future. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!